This is the perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah.
Didn't I already answer that question like 10 times this week?
Welcome back, podcast listeners, to another amazing episode of the Perfect RA Podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shalansky, and with me, as usual, the legendary Matthew Jarvis. How's it going, bud?
Ooh, it's good. Micah just got back from a trip to Seattle. I officiated a friend's wedding, which was a lot of fun, a first experience for me.
Oh, fantastic.
Also, Micah, my first time wearing a kilt, so it was also a fun experience.
There you go. Are you going to go to kilt wearing on a more frequent basis?
Well, for those of us who know, there's one way to decide if you're wearing a kilt or a skirt as a man, and you'll have to Google that one. In incognito mode, just as a recommendation.
All right. On that positive note, so we got a lot of things kind of cooking right now and going on, especially in the Perfect RA world, which we're super excited about. But one of the things that keeps coming up, Jarvis, is client processes. Mm-hmm. And this is so good. And this really gets into essence of so many things that we're chatting about in the Perfect RA is a lot of processes and how we implement things and how we put things out there and how we do it. And we have to create a system that is repeatable. And there's less and less people are protesting this, but every so often I'm still going to hear people says, you know what? Well, I really like a unique process and something needs to be special for the client in order to deliver value. And that's like the dumbest thing ever, in my humble opinion. That's not so humble because that's like a heart surgeon says, you know what? I've never really tried this way of heart surgery before, but you know what? I just really want to do it different than all the successful ways. So I'm going to create a new way to do this. They go, heck no! I want the way that you've done 100,000 times that is hyper successful. That's the route I want to go down. And we need to think about it in that context, or push back on me if you disagree, because granted, we're not doing heart surgery, but we have our entire client's life savings. This isn't a trivial matter.
Yeah, in fact, Nick Murray jokes, or maybe doesn't joke, about give your client the option to be broke in the morning or dead in the morning and ask them which one they would rather have. And most will respond with, I don't need till the morning to decide. Right. So it's not a trivial matter at all. But even if it were a trivial matter, right, like look at a Starbucks or a Chick-fil-A, right, which we would call a trivial service, right, also very refined. Now, Coach John Barron, who's been on the show a couple times, he says, Micah, that actually everything we do is a process, just most of them haven't been thought out. So everybody has a process for how they're going to deal with phone calls coming in. Most of them are, well, let me see if Jarvis is available right now and if he wants to talk to you. That would sort of be the default versus an intentional, you know what, Jarvis is already working with another client right now. Is there anything that I can help you with? Okay, if not, can I schedule a time for him to call you back tomorrow if this isn't a 911 emergency? So you can be intentional about these or you can be accidental.
Jarvis, so I called a CPA office the other day, and it's one I've worked with for a little while, and I called and I asked to speak to the CPA, and she said, well, let me see if she's available. Put me on hold. It comes back and says, I'm sorry, she's not available. I said, well, is she in the office? Yeah, she's just not available. I said, well, is she like indisposed, like in the restroom? I know it's kind of awkward. She's like, no, she's just unavailable. I said, oh, so I'm just not important enough to get on her calendar to interrupt her right now. She's like, no, Micah, that's not at all. I'm like, well, then why'd you tell me she's unavailable? Go check to see and then confirm. You know if she's on her phone or not. So basically, this was just a short question. Am I important enough in order for you to interrupt her to take my call? Now, I know I'm not. So I know my pecking order. Thank you very much. She was kind of backpedaling. I said, look, I was like, I'm not picking on you too much about this, but I really want you to think about this. When my clients call, that's what they're hearing is they are not important enough. You may want to think about a different way to communicate that. I know that's not what you're saying. I know that's not your intent. I know that's a total normal operandi of how people normally operate their business and answer the phones, but you really might want to think about that message.
Yeah, we've talked about this at some length, Mike, and it's talked about extensively in my book, where so you've got, I 100% agree with you, right? When you say, hey, let me see if he or she is available, you are literally saying, let me see if you are important enough to answer their call. Because if the person was calling in saying, this is Dave with the State Patrol, your daughter's been in an accident, guess what? They're going to take that call.
Immediately.
That's right. I mean, but if it also says, hey, this is Dave with AT&T, seeing if you want to change your cell phone service, they're not going to take a call. So that you are literally saying, hey, let me see if your call is important enough. Setting that aside, as the advisor. When your team walks in, they say, hey, we got Dave on the phone. Do you want to chat with him? Well, now whatever you've been working on has been interrupted. You now are thinking, is Dave important enough for me to talk to? What do you think he's going to call about? So your brain is going here. You will either take the call, heaven forbid, because now you're scrambling trying to get up to speed, or you won't take the call, in which case Dave is floating around in your mind until you decide to call him back. So it's the default is a recipe for failure. Be intentional here.
Yeah, and this is about all of our processes, right? There, and I love that comment from John Barron. We have a process for everything. Some are just documented and most are not. And that's the same thing about these processes. We have to make sure they're intentional about what are we solving for. Again, I'm going to go back to client financial planning because this is the world that we live in. In client financial planning, my goal is to get them X amount a month at a certain date that they can live on for the rest of their life. That's the goal. And so every decision that I am making needs to support that goal. And if it doesn't, we have a problem. And that's what I tell clients about, by the way. I said, look, anytime you call in the future and say, hey, I want money for this, or I'm thinking about doing this, I'm immediately going to go back to saying, what's our primary goal? Primary goal is you want to retire at 58 with $8,000 a month in income. Fantastic. Does this help us get us there or not? And great news, that's my job as the sounding board, is to say, hey, is this now, maybe you want to do something and now we need to change that goal. Fantastic. We can have the conversation. But I'm always going to bring it back to that overarching goal with a client. But that's the same thing we need to do with our practice. Anytime we go to do a process and implement, we say, great, what's the practice goal, right? What do we need to have here? And is this process intentionally helping us get here or not? And if it is, well, then fantastic. I absolutely love it. But if it's not, maybe we need to have a pause in that conversation and say, what do we need to tweak, change, or maybe completely get rid of to make sure we're always headed towards our goals?
Yeah, I love that, Micah. And anytime we have a system that's not giving us the result that we want, that's where we need to unwind that system. So it's easy to say, you know what, my team does a terrible job screening phone calls. Okay, unless you have incompetent people, which you might, but that's rarely the case. What you've given them is an incorrect system. We've talked about before, Micah, how Colleen in my office, she was very uncomfortable screening prospects for their net worth. And I would work with her and I would give her scripts. And she just wouldn't do it. And I thought, you know what? I think, is this like insubordination? Is like she willfully not following the process? And a coach, and it might have even been you, Mike, and you and I were chatting one time. This is the value of masterminds, saying, wait a second, maybe there's something else going on, right? So it was like, all right, is Colleen like totally loyal and follows the process everywhere else? Yeah, she does. Okay, so what's really going on here? So that's where we took a step back and said, hey, Colleen, what's going on? She says, you know, I'm just not comfortable. It feels like just like an impolite question to ask. And so we worked that system a different way, got to the same result. But again, anytime you're not getting the results you want, that's a time to go back and say, where did we miss a step in this process?
You know, I really love that because in our team, and I tell them this all the time, I mean, they're rock stars. They do a phenomenal job at so many things, but that doesn't mean they're perfect at everything. Not everybody can be like me. Okay, just kidding, right?
I was waiting for that
you know, and I run into that same issue that's there, right? I'm not good at absolutely everything that I do, so I need to focus on the things I'm really good at. So when we see this in our team members that normally they're good, but you give them this one thing and they just keep failing, okay, a couple things here. Maybe they're maybe they're not a good fit for the team. They need to go. Okay, maybe that's a possibility.
Yep, that does happen.
Right? It absolutely does. Or maybe you have them doing the wrong task. They're the right person in the wrong seat on the bus kind of thing. Do we need to change that task over and says, you know what, maybe that's not really an RM task. That needs to be an ops task. And ops is going to be doing so much better at this and allow us to succeed. Because you know what's demoralizing for team members is assigning them things continually that they know they can't do very well. They put off, they never get done. I was like, you're not building any morale, any goodwill with your team, and everybody's just getting frustrated about it. So these are some really good things to be looking at.
Yeah, for sure. In the book Drive, it talks about that mastery is one of the key areas of job satisfaction. So you actually need to give them a task that they can master. Micah, we talked last week in our webinar, and by the way, for those of you that have been waiting, I don't know why you've been waiting, but for those of you that have been waiting to join the Backstage Pass and to join Invictus, the cart is now open. We are in a kind of a onboarding surge, so you can until tomorrow sign up. But one of the things we talked about last week in our webinar as part of the onboarding process, something that we ran into in my office is paperwork. At one point in my career, my paperwork was consistently not being done correctly. Not as has mistakes, but the wrong forms were being done. And so I'd go back to my team and I would be angry and I'd say, how come this Roth account also didn't get open? And how come the householding form wasn't there? And how come these different things were? And they said, well, we just didn't know this time. So my one option was, to really double down on that. The other was, all right, let's take a step back. What would really help this process? And as we looked, we realized, what would really help this process is before we start onboarding, we make a spreadsheet, and we shared this last week, and it says, here's all the accounts they have, here's the accounts they need, here's the TOAs we're going to need, and then at the bottom is the checklist of forms that every person needs. Standing instructions, these kinds of things. And when I take 5 minutes with the team, and I do it after my second prospect meeting, I say, great, when they come back in for paperwork, let's walk through this real quick. Takes us 5 minutes. Paperwork is perfect or near perfect. So it's an example of let's take a step back and say, where can we add a step to make this work better?
You know, Jarvis, and not only is that in the process side of it too, but add to that, I'm sure you do the same thing, but it's templates. Whenever we have a package of information that's going to go out to a client, we want to have a template that they follow that says no matter what, you're going to use this template. Because if you just mail out custodian forms, guess what? That's not a lot of value to clients, right? It's confusing. What does this mean? Nobody understands what's on those damn forms. They got to sign off on all these pages, etc. So it's not super beneficial. So what's the value add that's going to be on there? Well, one of the things in our template is we have a handwritten note from our team that goes out on any paperwork that they send that says, you know what, thank you so much. This is the forms that you and Micah chatted about. And it's just 2 or 3 lines, right? We have a couple of stock things that they can choose from. They write a quick little handwritten note with, if you have any questions, please call me. And that gets paper clipped on the very top of the package of forms. Then it gets stuffed in a manila envelope with the return manila envelope with enough postage to make it back to us. Cause yes, we figured that one out the hard way. And so all of those things are put together and it's sent in. And it's a little thing, right? The handwritten form that we send out, this all of a sudden didn't answer every single question, a client's question that they had on the paperwork, but this made this so much more of a human process that's in place. And so our clients really like that. And now they know when they got this paperwork, this, oh, I'm going to call Clarice because Clarice wrote that note to them. And people don't get handwritten notes anymore, right? So there's a couple of lines that's inside of there. But again, this is about going through and saying, great, I should be able to go into your office and I should be able to say, hey, great, show me this process. And then where's the template of that package? Now we get a template, whether we're updating for surge meetings, right? We have our surge meeting prep sets. It's fantastic. We print, and I don't want them in paper. I'm sorry, online. When you get the surge packet, I want everything printed. And we're going to sit there and go through it with our ops and say, are these all the pages? And I'm going to explain why these pages are important. The same thing with new paperwork. Why do I want everything colored blue and pink? Because it increases our signature. Why do I want sign here tabs on the right side of the paperwork, not on the left side? Because when they put it on the left side, they often cover up the sign area. When you cover up the sign area and they sign, you take it off. Guess what? Their signature's not on the piece of paper anymore. So now what do, right? So all of these little things is we're pretty particular about how they have it set up to deliver more value to client, but that all comes from having that process A and B, having a template of success.
Mike, I want to draw out something that you mentioned there, which is you said you learned it the hard way. Now, you were saying specifically towards postage, and we have had things.
That's a very random statement.
No. That's the hard way. I have had things sent to clients postage due. That's not a way to deliver massive value. But this hard way thing is. We learn these things the hard way. It's also hard to implement these things, right? You and I are rattling off these processes that we've spent the better part of 2 decades and an incredible amount of money developing. So for our advisors, listen, if you look at this, you say, I don't know how to create this process. Like, I don't want to make all these mistakes 100 times. That is literally why we created the perfect RA. That's literally why we set up this podcast, is we said, wow, we both have made like all of the same mistakes and we've both come to like nearly all of the same conclusions. What if we gave everyone else a shortcut on this?
Yeah, that's exactly the whole purpose, right? How do we know what we're currently doing? How do we know what works? How do we know the mistakes to avoid? Because we've all been here before. Now, one of the things on the postage issue, Jarvis, that I totally didn't anticipate is that clients would put extra stuff in there to send back to me. Right? Because, I have a question on this. I'm just going to send this back. Well, we would just give just enough postage to send it and receive it. Not like we're trying to be misers on this, right? But it was just pretty simple. It's like, well, this is the same postage to send it. It's the same postage to receive it. But then it's not, because clients would put more stuff in there. So we have to add more postage to these things. Otherwise, I get a call from a client that says, listen, you cheap guy, I can't believe you didn't give me enough postage to mail this thing back to you. And they're a little cheeky with it. Now, sure, they stuff in like 12 other things that weren't supposed to be in there, but that's still my responsibility for that postage coming back.
Yeah, but there's so many lessons. We could do an entire podcast on this. I make sure that the envelopes we give to clients have our return address on it as well, so that if that happens, no matter what, it's coming to us, not back to them. I ran into a case, Michael. I realized we were sending the client newsletter out and it would have like 6 stamps on it. because the way that the stamps add up, it took 6 stamps to get to exactly $1.83. And I said, please, for the love of Pete, let's just put a $2 stamp on this thing, because it looked dumb. And the team was taking forever to put all these different stamps on here. So these are things that, again, we took us years to figure this out. You can figure them all out yourself. There's just no need to, though, at this point. That's why the Perfect RA exists.
Now, the younger advisors will all have stamp.com and never have licked stamps. And they're like, what are you guys talking about? Yeah, sorry. All right. Now we're those advisors. One of the other things that I think is really important in a client onboarding process, Jarvis, is explaining your process on how you communicate with other professionals, right? So when I'm working with a client, especially a new client. Now, this is, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them. You got to tell them, then you got to tell them what you told them, right? You got to do this multiple times consistently with clients, because we live and breathe this, but they don't. So anytime I'm going to talk to a client about meeting with another professional, especially new clients, I want to talk to them about what is my ideal process for this? And I say, look, my ideal process for this is I'm going to reach out to this other professional first, and that we're going to have a direct professional to professional conversation. Now, this isn't excluding you from anything. Delighted to have it. Just the reality is, when we talk to clients, we have to speak in a different way because we have to start and make sure that everyone is on the same page with what we're talking about. If I talk with another CPA, especially one I work with a lot, or another estate planning attorney, we can cut right to some things directly and answer a lot of questions in a shorter period of time. So out of respect for your checkbook and everyone's time, I really like to reach out to them first, give them an outline of what we're going to talk about. Then as we all come together, we're going to recap it with you, but this is going to save you money in the long run and time. Is that going to be okay with you?
Yeah, and of course, always that line, is that going to be okay with you? Micah, you mentioned the tell them, and sometimes it feels as advisors, we say, well, am I really setting the expectation again on how searches work? Am I really setting the expectation again on how client communication works or email correspondence works? And the answer is yes. Yes, even though it may feel like ad nauseum to you. I was just at the airport over the weekend. I walked past 4 signs that said, take the water bottle out of your bag. There was a guy standing there saying, hey, please take the water bottles out of your bag. And 2 people in front of me still had water bottles in their bag. Now, it's easy to dismiss that and say, these people are idiots. They are. That's a different discussion. The issue is we have busy lives.
That's happened to all of us at some point.
So for us, we're thinking about is our financial planning practice. For our client, they're also thinking about their kids and their spouse and their house and their health and what's on the news. They have 1,000 things to think about. You and I are narrowly focused on this. Of course, we know how the statement reads. We designed the statement. The client does not. So even though it may seem ad nauseum to you, it's still new and fresh for the client.
And the language I like to use a lot with this is saying, look, I know you already know this, right? Or I'm sure you already know this, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So I'm asking a little bit for their permission to talk about something that they may or may not know a little bit about, or they know enough just to be dangerous. And when we fail to set those expectations because we get lazy, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. We don't think we need to. We make exceptions. Boy, anytime you make an exception, that's going to bite you in the butt. But anytime you go down that path and that something is going to come back up that says, man, if I just would have followed this process, it really would have saved me a lot of time and hassle.
Oh, for sure. A line I like to use there is, as you may know. So anytime I'm doing, like, hey, as you may know, the limit for Roth accounts is 100 and whatever it is. And I always put that little preface in there. So again, I'm not insulting them. I'm just getting that in there.
Yeah, fantastic. So, and these are things that we take for granted as well. So in our client process and prospect process, and this is one thing that my wife brought to my attention years and years ago, is who is the primary person that has the most communication with your prospects? Hint, it's not you. It's not the advisor. Hope not, right? That's going to be your relationship manager. Who's answering your phones? And that person answering the phones really is most of the time kind of the lowest paid job, the lowest amount of training, the first person kind of off the shelf. You just answer the phones, and we think it's like this little thing when really it's this massive value that they're able to provide, or lack of value they're able to provide to clients. And so we really got to be thinking about who's picking up your phone and answering it, and what training are they going through, including who the backup people to answer the phone. How do they answer the phone? Do they have a smile on their face? Are they taking a breath and kind of pausing right before it? Are they picking it up where they're feeling very rushed? How are they they empowered to help the client? How do they lead with a yes? What are all of these things that are so important that we can take for granted as the financial advisor? For example, if I'm going to jump on a client meeting, right, it's not like all of a sudden I'm like bouncing around, all of a sudden jump to one client meeting to the next. It's like, no, I'm going to take a pause before my client meeting, right? I'm going to visualize how I want this client meeting to be successful. I'm going to think about the outcomes. I'm going to prepare for it. I'm going to do all this. Even if it takes me 10 seconds, I'm coming to that meeting in a collective state of mind. Well, guess what? When my receptionist answers the phone, I want her to come to that phone call in a collective state of mind. I don't want it to feel rushed. I don't want to feel that she doesn't have time for my clients, right? These are little details that matter a lot. How are you listening to that phone call? Can you hear the smile coming through? And if you can't, then they are not smiling enough. So these are really important things that you got to encourage your team to do, because this delivers huge amounts of value to the client.
Boy, it is the smallest things that make a difference. You're talking about whoever's answering the phone. So something we set up a few years ago in our office, I know, Micah, you have the same thing, is we've instructed the team, hey, only answer calls that you recognize the caller ID, or at least don't answer the calls that you recognize as spam. And then anytime a spam calls, and we include wholesalers on this list, block the number. And so we taught the team, everybody has a little checklist. How do you block numbers? Cool, somebody calls in. This is Dave from Acme Funds or whatever the fund is. Cool, we don't do these kind of things. Block the number. And so it took stress off the team's plate that I didn't even think was the thing. It wasn't until I went back and checked the phone logs. Like, there's all these spam calls that are coming in all day long. Let's block all of these. So it's, Micah, to your point, what are we doing to empower each team member? Because whatever frustrations you have, they also have frustrations, different ones, but they also have frustrations. And we want to take away frustrations from everyone.
That's a great point, right? Is about really empowering your team to tell you what are their issues, what are their dilemmas, what are their snafus, what are their stress points, etc. And then not to belittle that, right? Because that can be super easy for me to do. To just take the phone call one, right? And because we talked about that at the same time when it was going through, is the team was saying, well, we're getting all of these phone calls, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there's not that many clients that have called in. I was like, zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket, right? Your job is to answer the phone, shut up and do your job. But really that wasn't the right response. And then sure enough, when you go back and look at it, well, it was like a 3-to-1 ratio of client calls versus spam calls. And so, okay, well, fantastic. Now let's come up with a solution for this. And sure, I could look at it and say it really wasn't that many. It was enough that irritated my team, and I trust my team and I have a lot of value in my team. So if it's enough that irritates them, then I need to step up and say, great, what's a good solution that can help take care of this?
Oh, totally. And again, I feel like this is our plug episode. This is where it's so critical to hang out with other advisors. Because, Micah, you and I were talking about this, as you mentioned, at the same time. We were pulling our Ring Central logs at the same time, saying, all right, well, how many calls are really coming in? And what kind of calls are they? And if they are client calls, what are those client calls about? So doing this analysis and saying, all right, what's going on here? Micah, since we're kind of just bouncing around everywhere, let's talk just for a second about Zoom meetings. This is kind of just like our area of client experience grievances.
Okay, go for it.
You and I were on a Zoom meeting the other day. First things first, if you're doing Zoom meetings, change your damn waiting room. If your waiting room says the host will let you in when they feel like it's appropriate for you to grace them with your presence, change that thing. It should have your logo. It should say something funny like, hey, normally we'd offer you a cup of coffee right now, but you're on your own. Ha, ha, ha. So that aside, the Zoom meeting we were on, terrible sound quality. I don't know if these guys were in a WeWork space and they were trying to save some money, even though they were from a very high-end firm. But that sound quality, it can drive you crazy.
Yeah, as I'm recording this place and construction's taking place at my house, and I'm trying to work my mute button aggressively. So fair enough on that one. So Jarvis says that's a subtle hint. But no, I really agree with that. That sound quality is going to be great. And you need to do practice sessions with somebody that's going to give you honest feedback, right? Mm-hmm. There's a couple of team members that I have that I say, hey, here's the sound quality. They say, oh, Mike, it sounds great. I can hear you. So, no, I want the nitpicky. It's saying, are you typing on your keyboard? Are you tapping your foot? What's the high-pitched squealing? It's too loud. It's too soft, right? I want a lot of feedback. So anytime I get a new headset, we call this a headset game, right? I call multiple people. I tested out multiple different things. And you could say, well, it's a little dramatic to call 5 different people and test out the headsets in different environments. But yeah, when I get on a client call, I want that sucker to work. I want them to have zero issues hearing me and communicating. I want as least barriers to entry as possible. And also, when do you start the Zoom meetings, right? The damn people that, just because we have a 10 o'clock meeting, you don't start the Zoom meeting at 10 o'clock. You start it early. You let them in, right? At least get their sound connected, everything, so you're ready to go at 10. You're not putting on your shoes ready to run at 10 o'clock. If the practice starts at 10, you are ready to perform at 10 o'clock. And it's the same thing with client meetings. Show up on time, and the definition of on time is 15 minutes early. You need to be ready for that meeting.
Yeah, so much of this ties back to, and we've talked about this before on other episodes, about the difference between first place and second place is usually like 10x the prize pool. It's not 10x the effort, right? They're winning by inches. And so you might think, oh, my Zoom waiting room, that doesn't matter. Well, maybe that one in isolation does it, but when it's your Zoom waiting room, plus your sound quality, plus the confirmation email they got, plus that it started 2 minutes late, we start adding these things up, and suddenly the gap between the top advisors as measured by the value of their practice and the value they're delivering clients is this massive gap between the two. And the latter group says, I don't understand why Micah and Jarvis can charge so much. I don't understand why their practices make so much. I don't understand these things, because it's not just one enormous thing. It's thousands of little things that add up.
You know, and this is probably a good segue into our action items, Jarvis, because this isn't about figuring them all out at once. This is about taking one small thing and doing an action item and being able to implement it. All right. So first, action items, because the podcast is all about our action items and doing things. Join TPR. Like, seriously, right? This is one of the fastest growing podcasts for RIAs that are out there and growing this industry. We are transforming. Our goal is to transform the industry and how we deliver value and really streamline it for clients. Be part of that. You made it this far. And I know it sounds like a selfish plug, but seriously, the bigger we grow this community, the more action we're able to take, the more we're able to transform people's lives. And that is what we are on the mission doing. So it's time that you stop sitting on the sidelines, jump on board with us, because man, we got some big plans.
Mike, this may be a side rant. 100% TPR is transforming the nation, the industry, which is really fun, but we have to watch out for it. And as our listeners especially, you have to watch out for people that are paying lip service to TPR principles and the people that are actually doing them. So I see, for example, value add and delivered massive value dropped. I swear every other article I read says that, and I love it. But then I look in the rest of the article and it's a very shallow, like, oh, you have to deliver massive value by tying your shoes. Like, what? And so, you have to do surge meetings. So that means that you don't do meetings on Tuesdays at 2:00. So there's a lot of lip service being paid. You need to make sure that you're going to the source. And I define the source, of course, as Micah and I. But no, I define the source as somebody who has the practice that you want to have, right? That's why, Micah, you and I get together with masterminds. We get together with people who have the practices we want, and we learn from them. An action item aside from my rant, every time you're asked a question by your team, jot that down on a piece of paper, just on your desk. Every time my team asks me a question, jot that down and say, all right, is this truly a one-off, like we've never had a client abducted by aliens and we're not sure what to do? Or am I being asked the same question I was asked last week and the week before and the week before because I don't have a process for doing paperwork, as an example?
Yeah, I love that. And last action item I'm going to throw in there is in every communication with a client, set the expectation for the next communication. So what's an example of that is say, hey, I'm going to get back to you on this. When? No. Right? That's a horrible statement. It says, great news. Thanks for sending this information. By Wednesday of next week, I'm going to get this back to you. This is a phenomenal way that they're going to know. It says, hey, come back. Or it could say, sometimes my team will say, hey, this is great information. Thanks. Mike is going to add it to chat with you at your next appointment this fall or in October, right? When the client can come back and say, whoa, I'm so sorry I miscommunicated. I don't need that in fall. I need that next week. Great news. Now we've set that communication. It actually happened last week. And so this actually happened to us last week, and the team was able to see that. They said, hey, Mike is not going to review it to this fall in your client meeting. The client was like, nope, I'd really like a decision sooner. We were able to communicate with that client and get it done. Had we not set that expectation, the client would have been expecting an immediate response on something that they viewed as more important than we happened to view at the time, and it would have blown up. So setting these expectations for every single next communication, really important.
Yeah, because as you're listening to this, Nation, you're probably in surge, because I think the entire industry is now surging in September, October, November timeframe. So as those meetings are wrapping up and you're walking them out the door, or you're getting ready for the Zoom meeting to end, wow, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, it was so great to see you. I look forward to seeing you again in March and April, whenever your surge is. But of course, if something urgent, especially if something 911 comes up, we are always here to answer your questions. And it makes just such a lovely parting.
It is. It's fantastic. So until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.